The therapy room was quiet, filled with soft afternoon light and the faint scent of lavender. Emily sat on one end of the beige couch, her hands tight in her lap, staring straight ahead. Noah sat on the other end, shoulders tense, eyes on the floor. The space between them felt colder than ever. Their marriage, once full of love and laughter, had slowly faded into silence, and now even words felt like strangers. Dr. Laura Bennett, their marriage therapist, glanced at both of them. She had been seeing the couple for months now, and progress had been slow. They came every week, hoping to reconnect, but always left a little more distant than before. Today she had a new idea, one she hadn't used often, but had seen work wonders. She set down her notepad and folded her hands. "I want to try something different today," she said gently. Her voice was calm, thoughtful. Emily and Noah both looked up, mildly surprised. Dr. Bennett continued, "I've invited another couple to join us. Just for today." Emily's eyebrows lifted slightly. Noah leaned back, visibly uncomfortable. Before they could respond, the door opened behind them. A couple stepped in, Clara and James. They looked to be in their late 30s, like Emily and Noah. Clara had soft eyes and a steady presence. James had a kind face and walked with quiet confidence. They nodded politely, introduced themselves, and sat across from the married couple. Dr. Bennett smiled reassuringly. "Emily, Noah, this is Clara and James. They've agreed to share a bit about their own journey. I think it might help to hear someone else's experience. Sometimes perspective can open doors we didn't know were closed." Emily and Noah exchanged a hesitant glance. This wasn't what they expected, but something about Clara's calm energy eased Emily's nerves. James gave Noah a slight respectful nod, and Noah returned it with a guarded one of his own. Clara began speaking first. Her voice was soft but confident. "2 years ago, James and I were about to separate. We lived in the same house but barely spoke. We were more like roommates than partners." Emily's eyes shifted toward Clara, surprised by the honesty. "We tried to fix things ourselves," Clara went on. "Tried ignoring the problems, pretending things were fine. But they weren't." James picked up from there. "It wasn't one big fight that broke us. It was the silence, the lack of touch, the way we stopped seeing each other." Noah shifted uncomfortably. Emily looked down at her hands. Every word seemed to echo their own struggles. But hearing it out loud through someone else's voice hit differently. Dr. Bennett turned to Emily. "What are you feeling right now?" Emily hesitated, her voice quiet but sincere. "It feels like they're telling our story." Noah nodded slowly, still processing. He hadn't expected to relate to strangers, but something about Clara and James made it easier to look at things clearly. Their pain didn't feel like judgment, it felt like reflection. Dr. Bennett leaned forward, sensing the opening. What if healing doesn't just come from looking at each other, but from learning how others find their way back? Emily looked over at Noah again, really looked at him. For the first time in months, he met her eyes and didn't look away. Clara shared a moment that had changed things for them. A late-night conversation that had started with frustration and ended with honesty. "We told each other things we hadn't said in years," she said. "Not angry things, just the truth. I missed him. I wanted to be seen again." Emily blinked fast. Her throat tightened. She felt the sting of tears she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Dr. Bennett then posed a question that took both couples by surprise. "Would you be open to an exercise outside of this room? Nothing romantic. Nothing complicated. Just honest one-on-one conversations. Emily, I want you to meet with James. And Noah, I'd like you to spend some time talking with Clara." The idea hung in the air like something too strange to grasp. "What?" Noah said, confused. "It's not about replacing your partner," Dr. Bennett explained. "It's about seeing through someone else's lens. Sometimes when we speak to someone outside our story, we hear ourselves better." Emily hesitated but then nodded slowly. There was something intriguing about the idea. Not dangerous, just different. Clara looked at Emily kindly. "We're happy to talk. It's just conversation." James offered a gentle smile. Sometimes talking to someone who's already walked that road can help. Noah looked to Dr. Bennett for reassurance. And this helps. It can, she said simply, if you let it. The session ended not long after, but everything felt different. The silence between Emily and Noah as they walked to their car wasn't cold this time. It was thoughtful, curious. A new chapter had quietly opened. And neither of them knew what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't afraid to find out. The days after that unusual therapy session moved quickly, but Emily and Noah couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Bennett had asked them to do. The idea of meeting with the other couple, talking honestly and openly, seemed strange at first, almost uncomfortable. Yet beneath the hesitation, there was a flicker of hope neither wanted to admit. Maybe this was the chance they needed. Emily was the first to reach out. She called James and arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown. When she arrived, James was already there, waiting with a calm smile. The cafe was quiet, with soft music playing and sunlight streaming through the windows. They sat opposite each other, and at first the conversation felt stiff. They talked about simple things, the weather, the city, their work. Neither wanted to dive too deep right away. But James had a gentle way of asking questions, and slowly, the walls between them started to lower. He asked Emily when she last felt truly happy or free. The question caught her off guard. She thought about it and realized it had been years since she'd felt that way. She spoke about her love for painting, something she had given up after having kids and feeling overwhelmed by life's demands. She told James about the colors she once loved, the dreams she'd shelved. He listened carefully, never interrupting, simply letting her speak. James shared parts of his own story to how he and Clara had drifted apart, not because they stopped loving each other, because they stopped trying to understand one another. Emily found herself opening up more than she expected. She felt heard in a way she hadn't in a long time. Meanwhile, Noah met Clara at a nearby park. The autumn leaves were falling and a gentle breeze blew through the trees. They sat on a bench, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the afternoon. Clara spoke softly about vulnerability, how, for her, admitting fear and pain wasn't weakness, but a way to connect. Noah confessed how lost he'd felt in recent months, like he was walking through a fog, unsure of what he wanted or needed. Clara didn't offer quick solutions. She didn't judge or lecture. Instead, she just listened. Her presence was steady and comforting. Noah found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't with Emily for a long time. He realized that sometimes being heard without pressure was the first step toward healing. As the days passed, both couples met separately, and each conversation stirred something deep inside. Emily discovered parts of herself she'd forgotten: the artist, the dreamer, the woman who could laugh and feel alive. James encouraged her gently, reminding her that it was okay to want more from life and from love. Noah, through talking with Clara, began to see his own fears more clearly. He saw how much he had been holding back, how much he'd been afraid of failure, rejection, and loss. Clara's calm honesty gave him the courage to face those feelings without running away. Back in therapy, Dr. Bennett asked how these meetings had gone. Emily admitted that talking with James had reminded her of the joy she once had and the possibility of reclaiming it. Noah said that speaking with Clara made him want to try harder to be more open with Emily, even if it scared him. The room felt lighter. The tension that had been there before seemed to loosen just a bit. Both couples realized that this unusual experiment wasn't about replacing their partners or finding new love. It was about rediscovering what was already there beneath the pain and silence. Emily and Noah found themselves reflecting more on their own relationship. Recognizing the small moments they had lost: the good mornings, the gentle touches, the shared laughter. The conversations with Clara and James had opened their eyes to what love really needed: attention, honesty, and a willingness to be seen even when it was difficult. One evening, Emily and Noah sat together after dinner. Their talk was slow, careful, but honest. They shared thoughts and feelings they had kept inside for too long. For the first time in a while, they listened to each other without judgment or defensiveness. It wasn't easy. There were tears, moments of doubt, and fears that the past might be too much to overcome. But beneath it all was a growing sense of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The experience had changed them. It wasn't just about the other couple. It was about learning how to open their hearts again. The silence that had filled their home was slowly being replaced by words, by understanding, by connection. Clara and James, too, found new strength in sharing their journey. They realized that healing wasn't a straight path, but a series of small steps forward, together. In the quiet moments after those talks, both couples understood something important. That love wasn't about perfection or always getting it right. It was about showing up, being honest, and daring to hope. Even when the future felt uncertain, the wildest desire wasn't about escaping reality or chasing fantasies. It was about finding the courage to face their own hearts, to be vulnerable and to reach out to each other, and to themselves. And that made all the difference. Emily felt nervous as she walked into the quiet cafe where she was meeting James. It was their second meeting since the therapy session, and this time she was more ready to open up. At first, their conversations circled around simple topics: work, hobbies, and family. But James's calm voice and kind eyes made Emily feel safe. And soon he asked a question that caught her off guard. "When was the last time you truly felt seen?" Emily paused. It was a question no one had asked her in a long time. She thought back to her younger years, too, when she was full of dreams and hope, before life had worn her down. Slowly, she began to talk about her love for painting, how she used to lose herself in colors and brushes, but had stopped after the responsibilities of marriage and motherhood took over. She admitted how lonely she sometimes felt, even when surrounded by family. James listened without interrupting, his expression gentle and understanding. He shared a little about his own struggles with Clara, admitting that sometimes he felt trapped in routine and silence. Emily found herself smiling despite the heaviness of their words. There was something healing about being able to speak honestly to someone who wasn't part of her daily life, someone who could listen without judgment. Meanwhile, Noah met Clara at the park on a crisp afternoon. The leaves had turned gold and red, swirling gently in the breeze. They found a bench under a tall oak tree and sat quietly for a moment before Clara began to speak. She talked about vulnerability not as weakness, but as a way to connect. She told Noah how opening up to James had been hard, but necessary for healing. Noah felt an unexpected relief as he admitted to her how lost he had been lately, how he didn't know what he wanted anymore. Clara didn't offer advice or quick answers. Instead, she simply listened, her calm presence creating a safe space. Noah felt something shift inside him. He realized he had been holding in fears and doubts for too long, and just speaking them aloud made them lighter. He told Clara about his love for Emily, how he missed the closeness they once had but didn't know how to get it back. Over the next several days, both Emily and Noah continued their conversations with James and Clara. The talks were not about romance or replacing their partners, but about rediscovering parts of themselves and the meaning of connection. Emily realized how much she had buried her own needs and dreams. James encouraged her gently, reminding her that wanting happiness was not selfish. Noah found strength in Clara's honesty and her belief that healing required courage and patience. These new conversations stirred feelings that had long been buried. Emily felt a renewed sense of hope and energy, and Noah felt more willing to face the challenges in his marriage. They began to see their own relationship in a new light, not as broken beyond repair, but as something worth fighting for. When they returned to therapy with Dr. Bennett, both couples shared their experiences. Emily spoke about how talking with James helped her remember joy and creativity she thought she had lost. Noah explained how Clara's openness inspired him to be more honest with Emily. Dr. Bennett smiled, noting the progress made outside the therapy room. That evening, Emily and Noah sat quietly in their living room. The silence between them was no longer cold, but filled with possibility. Noah reached for Emily's hand and she didn't pull away. They began to talk carefully, honestly about what they wanted and needed. Tears came, but so did laughter. They weren't perfect, and the road ahead was uncertain, but they were together again. The conversations with Clara and James had done more than help. Emily and Noah see their own struggles. They help them remember how to love. It was not about grand gestures or easy fixes, but about showing up, listening, and daring to be vulnerable. Both couples learned that healing was a slow process, built on small steps and honest words. The wildest desire, they realized, was not about escape or fantasy, but about being truly known and loved, despite flaws and fears. As the weeks passed, Emily and Noah felt the first real stirrings of hope. Their hearts, once heavy and closed off, began to open again. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it together. When Emily and Noah walked into the therapy room that afternoon, something was different. There was a lightness between them, subtle but real. For the first time in a long while, they arrived holding hands. The space that had once felt heavy with silence now seemed open, as if a door they had long kept closed was finally unlocking. Dr. Bennett greeted them warmly, noticing the change right away. Across the room, Clara and James exchanged knowing smiles. They had all walked through something difficult together, something more than just therapy sessions, and it had begun to heal parts of their hearts. Emily spoke first, her voice steady but soft. "We talked," she said simply. "Really talked, like we haven't in years." Noah nodded beside her. "We listened too. Not just heard, but really listened." Clara and James shared their own experiences, how opening up had helped them find new strength in their relationship. They didn't claim to have all the answers, but they knew that honesty and presence were the keys to moving forward. Dr. Bennett leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said, "our wildest desires aren't about fantasy or escape. They're about something more real, being seen, being understood, being wanted again." Her words hung in the air, full of meaning. Noah looked at Emily with fresh eyes, his voice quieter than usual. "I forgot how much I love the way you see the world," he said. Emily's smile was gentle, tears shining in her eyes. "And I forgot how much I need your calm in my chaos." There were no promises of perfection or easy fixes. What they shared was a new beginning, fragile but hopeful. They were not cured, but they were willing to try again, to face their fears, to be honest with each other. Clara reached over and squeezed Emily's hand. "Sometimes," she whispered, "helping someone else save their love helps you save your own." It was a quiet truth that resonated deeply with everyone in the room. As the session ended, both couples felt a quiet peace settle around them. They hadn't just shared stories. They had shared pieces of themselves, vulnerabilities, hopes, and fears, and in that sharing, they found connection. Emily and Noah left holding hands, walking slower than usual, taking in the moment. The path ahead was still uncertain, but they had taken the first real steps back to each other. The wildest desire, they realized, wasn't about seeking something new. It was about rediscovering the love they almost lost, the love sitting right beside them all along. Claire had been folding laundry in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. It was nearly 7 p.m., that in-between hour when the sun dipped low and everything felt still. Her husband, Mark, was in the den with his laptop, like always. Tay didn't talk much anymore, just quiet check-ins about groceries, the dog, or bills. The kind of routine that slowly became distance. When the doorbell rang again, Claire reached for a dish towel, expecting a delivery. But Mark moved faster than usual, already halfway to the door. "I got it," he said quickly. That struck her as odd. She followed behind slowly, her instincts quietly on alert. From the hallway, she saw him open the front door, and there she was, a woman, around Claire's age, maybe a few years younger. She wore jeans, boots, and a long gray coat that clung to her from the wind outside. Her hair was perfectly in place, her lipstick soft but intentional. She smiled like she knew him well. Claire waited for an introduction, but none came. Mark turned to her after a long pause. "Claire, this is Jordan. She's an old friend. She's visiting town, and I told her she could stay here for a few nights." The words hit Claire like a cold gust. He hadn't mentioned any visitor. No warning, no question. Just a decision made without her. Still, Claire managed to smile. Of course, make yourself at home. Jordan nodded politely and stepped inside, wheeling a small suitcase behind her. Claire noticed how familiar she seemed, like she belonged in the space already, like she'd been there before. They made small talk over dinner. Mark and Jordan shared little stories from the past conferences, colleagues, cities Claire had never been to. Mark laughed easily. His face lit up in a way she hadn't seen in months. Jordan matched his energy effortlessly. She knew his timing, his humor. She even called him M at one point. A nickname Claire had never heard. Claire stayed mostly quiet, watching the rhythm between them. Something unspoken passed back and forth, and Claire felt like a guest in her own home. That night, as they all said goodnight, Claire climbed into bed while Mark stayed downstairs with Jordan. She lay on her side, eyes open in the dark, listening to the faint murmur of voices and laughter drifting up through the vents. She didn't say anything the next morning. Instead, she woke early and made coffee like always. Jordan joined her. In the kitchen, barefoot and casual, like she'd always lived there. "Hope I didn't mess up the rhythm around here," Jordan said lightly. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not at all. "We're not much of a rhythm lately." She didn't mean to say it, but it was true. The day passed quietly. Mark was more talkative than usual, at least with Jordan. They went on a walk together around the block to catch up. Claire stayed back, cleaning the already clean counters. Her hands moved with purpose, but her mind raced. This wasn't just a visit. There was history here, undeniable, alive. And standing in her kitchen when they came back, Jordan handed Claire a coffee from her favorite shop. "Mark told me this is your favorite." Claire took it, her fingers brushing Jordan's by accident. "Thanks," she said flatly. That was thoughtful. Didn't touch the drink. That evening, the house felt smaller. Claire excused herself early and went upstairs. She left them downstairs again, talking, laughing, living in some version of the past that Claire had never been part of. She pressed her pillow over her ears and closed her eyes. But the silence inside her was louder than their voices downstairs. She didn't cry, not yet. She didn't even feel angry, just numb. And tired of waiting for things to feel normal. Tired of being invisible in her own home. She remembered the early days with Mark when they stayed up late talking about dreams and books and music. When he couldn't wait to tell her about his day, when her laughter could light him up. That man hadn't been around in a long time. Now he lit up when someone else walked into the room. She didn't want to admit it, but she felt it deep in her gut. A shift, quiet one, but enough to know things were no longer what they seemed. Jordan was more than just a guest, and Claire. She had become a witness. Still, she said nothing. She let it all happen, because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive in words, it arrives in silence. In glances, in the heaviness of what goes unsaid. And Claire was learning that the hardest part of love is watching it turn into something unrecognizable. The days after Jordan's arrival passed in a strange blur. The house, once a place of comfort for Claire, began to feel like a stranger's space. Jordan moved through it with ease, like she owned every corner. She laughed openly with Mark, finished his sentences, and slipped into routines that made Claire feel invisible. Claire tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned, cooked, and did laundry, pretending everything was normal. But the silence between her and Mark grew heavier, stretching across every room. The distance wasn't new, it had been building for months, but Jordan's presence made it impossible to ignore. At breakfast, Mark and Jordan exchanged glances that said more than words. Claire watched, holding her coffee, feeling like she was watching a play where she wasn't cast. Jordan asked Mark about old friends, inside jokes, and trips they had taken together. Mark's eyes lit up, and his voice softened when he spoke to her. Claire forced herself to smile. But inside, a quiet ache grew. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was loneliness, the kind that comes when the person you love turns to someone else for the things you used to share. That afternoon, Claire sat in the living room, flipping through a photo album. Pictures of her and Mark smiling, holding hands, planning vacations. She traced the edges of the photographs with her finger, wondering when things started to unravel. When the laughter stopped being for her, Jordan came in, humming softly, and sat on the couch nearby. She looked at the album curiously. "You and Mark look happy here," she said gently. Claire nodded but said nothing. How could she explain the emptiness behind those smiles now? How could she tell a woman she barely knew that the man she loved was slipping away? That evening, Mark and Jordan stayed late in the kitchen, sharing wine and stories. Claire lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. Every laugh from downstairs felt like a reminder of how far apart they'd grown. She tried to tell herself it was just a visit, that Jordan needed a friend and Mark was only being kind. But the way Mark looked at Jordan, the way she leaned in close to him, it was more than kindness. Claire felt like an outsider in her own marriage. The next morning, Claire woke early. She found Mark already up, scrolling on his phone at the kitchen table. Jordan was in the shower. Claire took a deep breath and decided she needed to say something. Anything. But when Mark looked up and smiled, the words got stuck in her throat. "Mark," she began, her voice shaky. "How long has Jordan been staying with us?" He looked surprised. "A few days now. She had nowhere else to go." "But did you ask me first?" Mark shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "I didn't think it was a big deal." Claire felt a mix of hurt and frustration. The house wasn't just his. Their life wasn't his alone to decide. "I just wish you'd told me," she said quietly. He nodded, silent for a moment. "I know." Days passed. Claire watched the way Mark and Jordan's easy friendship grew. They finished each other's sentences, shared quiet jokes, and even exchanged looks that made Claire's stomach twist. One afternoon, Claire found Jordan in her bedroom, browsing through the closet. Jordan smiled apologetically. "I hope I'm not intruding. Just wanted to find a sweater." Claire didn't know what to say. She nodded, swallowing her discomfort. That night, Claire stayed up late. She couldn't stop thinking about the quiet changes in their home, about the way Mark's attention had shifted, about how Jordan fit in where Claire no longer felt welcome. She wondered if Mark even noticed what was happening. The truth was, Claire was scared. Scared that this wasn't just a visit, that Jordan wasn't just a friend, that everything she believed in their marriage, their life was unraveling. But she still said nothing. Instead, she held her silence like a fragile shield, protecting herself from a truth she wasn't ready to face. Each day, the walls seemed to close in. The house, once full of memories and love, felt cold and unfamiliar. Claire's heart ached with a longing she couldn't name. She wanted to talk to Mark, to demand answers, to fight for what they had lost. But every time she tried, the words dissolved into fear and doubt. So she waited, watched, and let it all happen, because sometimes pain is easier to bear when it's quiet. When it hides behind polite smiles and whispered good nights, Claire knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a journey she hadn't chosen but had to take. And as Jordan's presence grew stronger, Claire realized she was standing at a crossroads, one that would change everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and herself. The fourth night arrived like every other, quiet but heavy with tension. Claire stayed in bed, pretending to sleep while the voices downstairs floated up through the floorboards. Mark and Jordan were still awake, talking in low tones that carried just enough warmth to sting. Claire's mind was a storm. She had held back her feelings for days, trying to stay calm and strong, but the quiet was breaking her apart. She didn't want to confront Mark yet, didn't want to push him further away, but something inside her demanded answers. Early the next morning, before the sun fully rose, Claire found Mark in the kitchen. He was rinsing dishes in the sink, the silence between them thick and uncomfortable. She stood at the doorway, her heart pounding. "How do you really know her?" Claire asked, voice low but steady. Mark didn't look up immediately. He took a slow breath, then met her eyes. "We met at a work conference last year. She was going through a tough time and I wanted to help," he said. His tone was flat, but Claire could hear the weight behind the words. Just a friend. Claire pressed gently. He hesitated. Yes, but it's complicated. Claire's throat tightened. Complicated how? Mark leaned against the counter, running his hands through his hair. I don't know how it happened. I wasn't looking for anything. But with her, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Claire swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Do you still feel that way about me? He looked away, silent. I'm asking because I need to know, she said, voice trembling. Mark finally met her gaze. I don't know if I do. The honesty hit Claire like a blow. She felt the room spin, her knees weak. But she stayed standing, fighting the urge to run, to scream, to cry. She remembered the years with Mark, the laughter, the plans, the quiet moments that felt like the whole world. And now that world was slipping through her fingers. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. I was scared, he admitted. Scared of hurting you. Scared of losing what we had. Claire's voice softened. But silence hurts too. Mark nodded, eyes full of regret. I never meant for this to happen. They stood there, two broken people, in a kitchen filled with the ghosts of what once was. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Claire said, What do we do now? Mark shook his head. I don't know. I'm lost. Claire felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she turned and left the kitchen, her heart heavier than ever. That day, Claire wandered through the house like a ghost. Everything felt different. The walls seemed to close in, the silence louder than any argument. She avoided Mark, needing space to think, to breathe, to figure out what she wanted. But the truth was clear. Their marriage was at a crossroads. That evening, Claire overheard Mark and Jordan talking in the living room. The warmth in their voices was unmistakable. It wasn't just friendship anymore. She felt a wave of pain so sharp she clenched her fists to stop from shaking. When Mark finally came upstairs, Claire was waiting. Are you leaving? She asked quietly. He looked at her, surprised. What, Jordan? She said. Are you going to leave? Mark sighed. I don't know. I wish I had an answer. Claire looked away. Because I need one. That night, Claire lay awake, thinking about everything she had lost and everything she still hoped to save. She realized love wasn't always enough. Sometimes it took honesty, courage, and the willingness to face the hardest truths. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep pretending. She needed to find herself again if it meant losing him. The days after that tense conversation felt like walking through fog. Claire woke up each morning unsure what she would find. Would Mark still be there? Would Jordan still be in their home? The uncertainty was crushing. But amid all the confusion, one thing became clear. Claire could no longer live in silence or fear. She began to reclaim small parts of herself. Early morning runs around the neighborhood, a habit she'd let go years ago. Long walks with their dog, Max, where she let her thoughts wander without judgment. She reconnected with friends she had pushed away, accepting their invitations to coffee and laughter. Each step helped her breathe a little easier. Mark kept to himself mostly, avoiding deep conversations. The house felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. More like a space waiting for a storm to break. Jordan was still there, her presence a constant reminder of what was breaking apart. One afternoon, Claire found Jordan in the garden, kneeling by the flower beds. For the first time, Claire saw softness in her. A woman who wasn't just a symbol of betrayal, but someone struggling too. I never wanted to hurt you, Jordan said quietly when Claire approached. Claire nodded, unsure how to respond. There were no easy words for this tangled mess, but she wanted to believe that beneath the hurt was a chance for healing, even if it seemed impossible now. That evening, Claire sat down with Mark again. This time, the words came more easily. We need to be honest, Claire said. Not just with each other, but with ourselves. Where do we want to go from here? Mark looked tired but nodded. I'm willing to try if you are. Claire hesitated. Was she ready to forgive? Could they find a way back? She realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or pretending nothing had happened. It was about accepting reality and choosing to move forward. No matter how painful, they agreed to start counseling, something they'd postponed for too long. Talking to someone neutral, someone who could help them understand each other again. The process wasn't easy. There were tears, silences, and moments when both wanted to give up. But slowly, Claire saw glimpses of the man she once loved, kind, thoughtful, vulnerable. Mark also started to see Claire in a new light, not just as his wife, but as a person who deserved honesty and respect. The hardest part was rebuilding trust. It didn't come overnight. It came in small actions, showing up, listening, being present. Meanwhile, Jordan decided it was time to leave. She packed her bags one rainy morning, leaving the house quieter than it had been in weeks. Claire felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The woman who had caused so much pain was gone, but the scars remained in the weeks that followed. Claire and Mark worked on their marriage like rebuilding a house after a storm, patching walls, cleaning debris, making plans for a new foundation. Claire found strength she didn't know she had. She learned that sometimes love means letting go, but also knowing when to hold on. One evening, after a long day of therapy and honest conversation, Claire and Mark sat on their porch swing. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over their neighborhood. Mark reached for Claire's hand. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Claire squeezed his hand back. "Me too." They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And sometimes that was enough to start again. Claire realized that life wasn't perfect and love wasn't always easy, but it was real, and in the end, that was what mattered most.